Chapter 4. The phrases kept recurring to his mind after they had gone out, and as they wandered through the lighted streets with all their strange and variegated shows, with glittering windows and glittering lamps, with the ebb and flow of faces, the voices and the laughter, the surging crowds about the theater doors, the flashing hansoms and the omnibuses lumbering heavily along to strange regions such as Turnham Green and Castleknow and Cricklewood and Stoke Newington, why, they were as unknown as cities in Cathay. It was a dim, hot night. All the great city smoked as with a mist, and a tawny moon rose through films of cloud far in the vista of the east. Ambrose thought with a sudden recollection that the moon, that world of splendor, was shining in a farther land, on the coast of the wild rocks, on the heaving sea, on the fairy apple garths in Avalon, where, though the apples are always golden, yet the blossoms of enchantment never fade, but hang forever against the sky. They were passing a half-lit street, and these dreams were broken by the sudden clanging, rattling music of a piano organ. For a moment they saw the shadowy figures of the children as they flitted to and fro, dancing odd measures in the rhythm of the tune. Then they came into a long, narrow way with a church spire in the distance, and near the church they passed the church shop, Roman evidently, from the subjects and the treatment of the works of art on view. But it was strange. In the middle of the window was a crude, glaring statue of some saint. He was in bright red robes, sprinkled with golden stars. The blood rained down from a wound in his forehead, and with one hand he drew the scarlet vestment aside and pointed to the dreadful gash above his heart, and from this again the bloody drops fell thick. The colors stared and shrieked, and yet through the bad, cheap art there seemed to shine a rapture that was very near to beauty. The thing expressed was so great that it had to a certain extent overcome the villainy of the expression. They wandered vaguely after their custom. Ambrose was silent. He was thinking of Avalon and red martyrdom and the Frenchman's parting salutation, of the vision in one of the old books, the man clothed in a robe redder and more shining than burning fire, and his feet and his hands and his face were of a like flame, and 5 angels in fiery vesture stood about him, and at the feet of the man the ground was covered with a ruddy dew. They passed under an old church tower that rose white in the moonlight above them. The air had cleared, the mist had floated away, and now the sky glowed violet, and the white stones of the classic spirit shone on high. From it there came suddenly a tumult of glad sound, exultant bells in ever-changing order, pealing out as if to honor some great victory, so that the mirth of the street below became but a trivial, restless noise. He thought of some passage that he had read but could not distinctly remember. A ship was coming back to its haven after a weary and tempestuous voyage over many dreadful seas, and those on board saw the tumult in the city as their sails were sighted, heard afar the shouts of gladness from the rejoicing people, heard the bells from all the spires and towers break suddenly into triumphant chorus, sounding high above the washing of the waves. Ambrose roused himself from his dreams. They had been walking in a circle, and had returned almost to the street of the chateau. Though their knowledge of the district being of an unscientific character, they were under the impression that they were a mile or so away from that particular point. As it happened, they had not entered this street before, and they were charmed at the sudden appearance of stained glass lighted up from within. The color was rich and good. There were flourished scrolls and grotesques in the Renaissance manner, many emblazoned shields in ruby and gold and azure. In the centerpiece showed the court of the Beer King, a jovial and venerable figure attended by a host of dwarfs and kobolds, all holding on high enormous mugs of beer. They went in boldly and were glad. It was the famous 3 Kings in its golden and unreformed days, but this they knew not. The room was of a moderate size, very low, with great dark beams in the white ceiling. White were the walls. On the plaster, black letter texts with vermilion initials praised the drinker's art, and more kobolds, in black and red, loomed oddly in unsuspected corners. The lighting, presumably, was gas, but all that was visible were great antique lanterns, depending from iron hooks, and through their dull green glass only a dim radiance fell upon the heavy oak tables and the drinkers. From the middle beam an enormous bouquet of fresh hops hung on high. There was a subdued murmur of talk, and now and then the clatter of the lid of a mug, as fresh beer was ordered. In one corner there was a kind of bar. Behind it a couple of grim women, the kobolds apparently, performed their office, and above, on a sort of rack, hung mugs and tankards of all sizes and of all fantasies. There were plain mugs of creamy earthenware, mugs gaudily and oddly painted with garlanded goats, with hunting scenes, with towering castles, with flaming posies of flowers. Then some friend of the drunken, some sage who had pried curiously into the secrets of thirst, had made a series of wonders in glass, so shining and crystalline that to behold them was as if one looked into a well, for every glitter of the facets gave promise of satisfaction. There were the mugs, capacious and very deep, crowned for the most part not with mere plain lids of common use and make, but with tall spires in pewter, richly ornamented, evident survivals from the Middle Ages. Ambrose's eyes glistened. The place was altogether as he would have designed it. Nellie, too, was glad to sit down, for they had walked longer than usual. She was refreshed by a glass of some cool drink, with a borage flower and a cherry floating in it, and Ambrose ordered a mug of beer. It is not known how many of these krugs he emptied. It was, as has been noted, a sultry night, and the streets were dusty, and that glass of Benedictine after dinner rather evokes than dismisses the demon of thirst. Still, Munich beer is no hot and rebellious drink, so the causes of what followed must probably be sought for in other springs. Ambrose took a deep draught, gazed upward to the ceiling, and ordered another mug of beer for himself and some more of the cool and delicate and flowery beverage for Nellie. When the drink was set upon the board, he thus began, without title or preface. "You must know, dear Nellie," he said, "that the marriage of Panurge, which fell out in due time, according to the oracle and advice of the holy bottle, was by no means a fortunate one. For against all the counsel of Pantagruel and of Friar John, and indeed of all his friends, Panurge married in a fit of spleen and obstinacy the crooked and squinting daughter of the little old man who sold green sauce in the Rue Quincongron at Tours. You will see the very place in a few days, and then you will understand everything." "You do not understand that. My child, that is impiety, since it accuses the Zeitgeist, who is certainly the only God that ever existed, as you will see more fully demonstrated in Huxley and Spencer, and all the leading articles in all the leading newspapers. Quod erat demonstrandum. To be still more precise, you must know that when I am dead, and a very great man indeed, many thousands of people will come from all the quarters of the globe, not forgetting the United States, to Lupton. They will come and stare very hard at the old Grange, which will have an inscription about me on the wall. They will spend hours in high school. They will walk all round playing fields. They will cut little bits off brooks and quarries. Then they will view the sulphuric acid works, the chemical manure factory, and the free library, and whatever other stinkpots and cesspools Lupton town may contain. They will finally enjoy the view of the Midland Railway Goods Station. Then they will say, 'Now we understand him. Now one sees how he got all his inspiration in that lovely old school and the wonderful English countryside.' So you see that when I show you the Rue Quincongron, you will perfectly understand this history. Let us drink. The world shall never be drowned again, so have no fear." Well, the fact remains that Panurge having married this hideous wench aforesaid, was excessively unhappy. It was in vain that he argued with his wife in all known languages, and in some that are unknown, for, as she said, she only knew 2 languages, the one of Touraine and the other of the stick, and this second she taught Panurge per modum passionis, that is, by beating him, and this so thoroughly that poor Pilgerlick was sore from head to foot. He was a worthy little fellow, but the greatest coward that ever breathed. Believe me, illustrious drinkers, and most precious Nelly, never was man so wretched as this Panurge since paradise fell from Adam. This is the true doctrine. I heard it when I was at Eleusis. You inquire what was the matter. Why, in the first place, this vile wretch whom they all called, so much did they hate her, la vie mortale, or deadly life, this vile wretch, I say, what do you think that she did when the last note of the fiddles had sounded, and the wedding guests had gone off to the 3 lampreys, to kill a certain worm? The which worm is most certainly immortal, since it is not dead yet. Well then, what did Madame Panurge? Nothing but this. She robbed her excellent and devoted husband of all that he had. Doubtless you remember how, in the old days, Panurge had played ducks and drakes with the money that Pantagruel had given him, so that he borrowed on his corn while it was still in the ear, and before it was sown, if we inquire a little more closely. In truth, the good little man never had a penny to bless himself withal, for the which cause Pantagruel loved him all the more dearly. So that when the Dive Bouteille gave its oracle, and Panurge chose a spouse, Pantagruel showed how preciously he esteemed a hearty spender by giving him such a treasure that the goldsmiths who live under the bell of St. Gatian still talk of it before they dine, because by doing so their mouths water. And these salivary secretions are of high benefit to the digestion. Read on this, Galen. If you would know how great and glorious this treasure was, you must go to the library of the Archevêque at Tours, where they will show you a vast volume bound in pigskin, the name of which I have forgotten. But this book is nothing else than the list of all the wonders and glories of Pantagruel's wedding present to Panurge. It contains surprising things, I can tell you, for, in good coin of the realm alone, never was gift that might compare with it. And besides the common money, there were ancient pieces, the very names of which are now incomprehensible, and incomprehensible they will remain till the coming of the Coqcigrues. There was, for instance, a great gold soul, a world in itself, as some said truly, and I know not how many myriad of étoiles, all of the finest silver that was ever minted, and ange gardien, which the learned think must have been first coined at Angers, though others will have it that they were the same as our angels. And as for the roses de paradis and couronne immortelle, I believe he had as many of them as ever he would. Beauties and joys he was to keep for pocket money. Small change is sometimes great gain. And, as I say, no sooner had Panurge married that accursed daughter of the Rue Quincangron than she robbed him of everything, down to the last brass farthing. The fact is that the woman was a witch. She was also something else, which I leave out for the present. But, if you will believe me, she cast such a spell upon Panurge that he thought himself an absolute beggar. Thus he would look at his sol d'or and say, "What is the use of that? It is only a great bright lump. I can see it every day." Then, when they said, "But how about those anges gardiens?" he would reply, "What are they? Have you seen them? I never see them. Show them to me." And so with all else, and all the while that villain of a woman beat, thumped, and belabored him, so that the tears were always in his eyes, and they say you could hear him howling all over the world. Everybody said that he made a pretty mess of it, and would come to a bad end. Luckily for him, this witch of a wife of his would sometimes doze off for a few minutes, and then he had a little peace, and he would wonder what had become of all the gay girls and gracious ladies that he had known in old times, for he had played the devil with the women in his day, and could have taught Ovid lessons in art à moi. Now, of course, it was as much as his life was worth to mention the very name of one of these ladies, and as for any little sly visits, stolen endearments, hidden embraces, or any small matters of that kind, it was good-bye, I shall see you next, never miss. Nor was this all, but worse remains behind, and it is my belief that it is the thought of what I am going to tell you that makes the wind wail and cry of winter nights, and the clouds weep and the sky look black. For in truth it is the greatest sorrow that ever was since the beginning of the world. I must out with it quick, or I shall never have done. In plain English, and as true as I sit here, drinking good ale, not one drop or minim or drachm or pennyweight of drink had Panurge tasted since the day of his wedding. He had implored mercy. He had told her how he had served Gargantua and Pantagruel, and had got into the habit of drinking in his sleep, and his wife had merely advised him to go to the devil. She was not going to let him so much as look at the nasty stuff. "Touch not, taste not, smell not, is my motto," said she. She gave him a blue ribbon, which she said would make up for it. "What do you want with drink?" said she. "Go and do business instead. It's much better for you." Sad, then, and sorry enough, was the estate of poor Panurge. At last, so wretched did he become, that he took advantage of one of his wife's dozes, and stole away to the good Pantagruel, and told him the whole story. And a very bad one it was, so that the tears rolled down Pantagruel's cheeks from sheer grief, and each teardrop contained exactly 118 gallons of aqueous fluid, according to the calculations of the best geometers. The man saw that the case was a desperate one, and heaven knew, he said, whether it could be mended or not. But certain it was that a business such as this could not be settled in a hurry, since it was not like a game at shove a penny to be gotten over between 2 gallons of wine. He therefore counselled Panurge to have patience, and bear with his wife for a few thousand years, and in the meantime they would see what could be done. But, lest his patience should wear out, he gave him an odd drug or medicine prepared by the great artist of the mountains of Cathay, and this he was to drop into his wife's glass, for though he might have no drink, she was drunk 3 times a day, and she would sleep all the longer, and leave him a while in peace. This Panurge very faithfully performed, and got a little rest now and again, and they say that while that devil of a woman snored and snorted, he was able, by odd chances once or twice, to get a hold of a drop of the right stuff, good old stingo from the big barrel, which he lapped up as eagerly as a kitten laps cream. Others there be who declare that once or twice he got about his sad old tricks, while his ugly wife was sleeping in the sun. The women on the Mail make no secret of their opinion that his old mistress, Madame Sophia, was seen stealing in and out of the house as slyly as you please, and God knows what goes on when the door is shut. But the Tourenians were always sad gossips, and one must not believe all that one hears. I leave out the flat scandalmongers who are bold enough to declare that he kept one mistress at Jerusalem, another at Eleusis, another in Egypt, and about as many as are contained in the Seraglio of the Grand Turk, scattered up and down in the towns and villages of Asia. But I do believe there was some kissing in dark corners, and a curtain hung across one room in the house could tell odd tales. Nevertheless, la vie mortelle, a pest on her, was more often awake than asleep, and when she was awake, Panurge's case was worse than ever, for, you see, the woman was no piece of a fool, and she saw sure enough that something was going on. The stingo in the barrel was lower than of rights, and more than once she had caught her husband looking almost happy, at which she beat the house about his ears. Then another time Madame Sophia dropped her ring, and again this sweet lady came one morning so strongly perfumed that she scented the whole place, and when La Vie woke up it smelt like a church. There was fine work then, I promise you. The people heard the bangs and curses and shrieks and groans as far as Amboise on the one side and Luynes on the other. In that year the Loire rose 10 feet higher than the banks on account of Panurge's tears. As a punishment, She made him go and be industrial, and he built 10,000 stinkpot factories with 20,000 chimneys, and all the leaves and trees and green grass and flowers in the world were blackened and dyed, and all the waters were poisoned, so that there were no perch in the Loire, and a salmon fetched 40 sols the pound at Chinon market. As for the men and women, they became yellow apes, and listened to a codger named Calvin, who told them they would all be damned eternally, except himself and his friends, and they found his doctrine very comforting, and probable too, since they had the sense to know that they were more than half damned already. I don't know whether Panurge's fate was worse on this occasion, or on another, when his wife found a book in his writing, full from end to end of poetry. Some of it about the wonderful treasure that Pantagruel had given him, which he was supposed to have forgotten. Some of it verses to those old Lytle loves of his, with a whole epic in praise of his mistress-in-chief Sophia. Then, indeed, there was the very deuce to pay. It was bread and water, stripes and torment, all day long, and Lavie swore a great oath that if he ever did it again, he should be sent to spend the rest of his life in Manchester, whereupon he fell into a swoon from horrid fright, and lay like a log, so that everybody thought he was dead. All this while the great Pantagruel was not idle. Perceiving how desperate the matter was, he summoned the 1001st Great Economical Council of all the sages of the wide world, and when the fathers had come, and had heard high mass at St. Gatien's, the session was opened in a pavilion in the meadows by the Loire, just under the lantern of Roche-Carbon, whence this council is always styled the Great and Holy Council of the Lantern. If you want to know where the place is, you can do so very easily, for there is a choice tavern on the spot where the pavilion stood, and there you may have Malot and Friteur and amber wine of Vouvray, better than in any tavern in Touraine. As for the history of the acts of this great council, it is still a writing, and so far only 2,000 volumes in elephant folio have been printed sub signo Lucerne cum permisso superiorum. However, as it is necessary to be brief, it may be said that the Holy Fathers of the Lantern, after having heard the whole case as it was exposed to them by the great clerks of Pantagruel, having digested all the arguments, looked into the precedents, applied themselves to the doctrine, explored the hidden wisdom, consulted the canons, searched the scriptures, divided the dogma, distinguished the distinctions, and answered the questions, resolved with one voice that there was no help in the world for Panurge, save only this. He must forthwith achieve the most high, noble, and glorious quest of the Saint Graal, for no other way was there under heaven by which he might rid himself of that pestilent wife of his, la vie mortale. And on some other occasion, said Ambrose, you may hear of the last voyage of Panurge to the glassy isle of the Holy Graal, of the incredible adventures that he achieved, of the dread perils through which he passed, of the great wonders and marvels and compassions of the way, of the manner in which he received the title Planten Etonau, which signifies child of the water floods, and how at last he gloriously attained the vision of the Saint Graal, and was most happily translated out of the power of la vie mortale. And where is he now? Said Nelly, who had found the tale interesting but obscure. It is not precisely known. Opinions vary, but there are two odd things. One is that he is exactly like that man in the red dress whose statue we saw in the shop window tonight, and the other is that from that day to this he has never been sober for a single minute. Calix meos in ebriens, quam praeclaros est.